Today we're gonna make a simple reindeer. Now I tried to make this as simple as possible, but I gotta say that anything with slimmer, longer limbs like this is gonna be significantly harder than rounder animals like a bear or a raccoon or something like that. However, this project is gonna be significantly easier compared to this horse project, for example, but it might not be the best project to start with if you've never done whittling before. This is a knife only project, and what I have here is what I usually use, so Norway spruce, and this is the recommended size, but you can scale this up or down if you want. It just has to be in the same proportions, so 5.5 centimeters times 7 centimeters times a little bit over 2 centimeters, 2.2 pretty much. So you can use a calculator to scale it up or down. I don't really recommend going any smaller than this. And even going larger than this is going to be a bit more work, but the legs are going to be stronger. So you can choose for yourself based on the resources that you have. We're going to start this project by dividing this in 3, like that. And then I'm dividing this the other way, but in 4. Now from here, these 3 squares can be removed. And I think the easiest way to do that is that we're going to start with sweeping cuts. The rough cut version of the sweeping cut works very well in the beginning. And then in order to make a tighter curve, this push cut version or this pairing cut version works quite well. And then we need to make a stop cut. So I'm turning this curve into a sharp inside corner. That's good enough for now. Next we're going to do a similar thing down here. So here in the middle, I'm going to go just a little bit this way. This is where the front legs are going to be. From this corner to somewhere over here, we're going to draw a curve like this. We want to leave a little bit of room over here for the feet, but now all of this can be removed. This time it starts a little differently, because both ends are important. So I'm gonna make a stop cut. And then I'm starting to make these sweeping cuts that end with this stop cut. It's easiest to remove wood from these sharp edges first, and now we have a thinner section in the middle too, and then again from the sides and again from the middle. So this, in my opinion, is way easier compared to just trying to make one sweeping cut through the entire width of this piece of wood. Right here where this line is, we can make a sharper corner between this curved leg and the stomach. Like that. Then we're going to do a similar thing over here. I'm just reinforcing these lines so we still have this division into 3 parts over here. This one in the middle, we're going to divide in 3 again. And then from this 1/3 line all the way over here, leaving a similar amount of space as over here, we're going to draw a curve like this. And now we can remove this bit. And this is just sweeping cuts. What I'm doing here is basically a combination of the push cut version of the sweeping cut and the rough cut version of the sweeping cut. So I'm pushing in the beginning to have more control and precision, but then I'm just letting the blade slide like a rough cut. That way, in situations like this, you can get best of both cuts by having the control in the beginning, but then also the speed and the force of a rough cut version. Next we're going to work on the head shape, and that's going to be something like this. So we'll go horizontally a little bit like this, and then just a straight line somewhere over here. And then right here on top of the front limbs there's going to be a little hump, and from there a curve like this for the neck. And now we can make some adjustments on this so that it looks more proportionate. Something like that is pretty good. So the neck right here should be just a little bit thicker than the head right here. So I can remove just a little bit more. Then we can make a V cut over here between the head and the neck. That's looking a lot better. And then we can make a V cut over here. But to understand this better, the basic shape of the antlers is going to be something like this. Actually, I'm going to draw that with a different color so that it shows better. Alright, so here we have a little spike like that. And here we have a two-ended part. Then we have a nice curvature that doesn't quite connect to the head, and it leads over here. And this also has two ends like that, and then it connects to the head. It's kind of hard to see. It connects to the head with something like this. All right. So that means that we can make a V cut right here. Now this is a slightly awkward place to cut due to the grain of the wood, but if you just make small cuts and try to slide the blade like this a little bit, then the cuts will be cleaner. Now that's good enough for now, because we don't need to work on this entire width. The head is not going to be this thick, not even close. So below this line, we can now make the head a lot slimmer. And also a little bit above the line, because the antlers are going to connect kind of like this. So we can remove quite a bit of wood from here. These parts on the front are also going to be quite narrow. Only these parts are going to be wide. And now that I still have this, I'm going to redraw it a little bit. Quite often you have to redraw sketches so that initially when you make the first one, you get the idea of where you need to cut. And then when you cut from there, you don't have the drawing anymore, and then you're gonna just make a new sketch like that and continue cutting. And with almost all projects, especially with animals, no individual part is something that can just exist on its own. While I'm slimming down the neck and the head, it's also quite natural and easy to start taking off these sharp edges that we're not gonna need anyways. These longer cuts help with maintaining good proportions and building the entire shape bit by bit all at once. Because if you make one part perfect from the get-go, then it might not actually be perfect since the proportions might not match. But now that I already have a basic shape for the head, I can work on these other parts. So you gotta remember the hump over here on the back. So that means a few sweeping cuts right here. Something like that. And now we can start making these parts round. So what I'm doing is I'm extending these two stop cuts to the sides, making them round. And that way I can get a round stomach for this reindeer. Right now we need to create a couple more inside corners over here on the rear end. So right here in the middle of this section, we're gonna have one of those inside corners, something like that. Then back here, we're gonna have another one, and then the tail, and then an outside curve above the tail like that. That's the basic shape. This can actually be more like a curve instead of an inside corner, so more like something like this. And since the tail is only going to be right here in the middle, I don't have to worry about it right now. I can just make this curve at first, and also this inside corner. This is really not the optimal kind of wood for this project. I used to use Norway spruce that had a tighter grain, like you can see over here. Still pretty loose, but compared to this one, there's quite a big difference. And now I'm kind of suffering from choosing something where the grain is so far apart that makes it not go very smooth. But there's ways to work around it by making, for example, smaller cuts like this, just gently removing wood and then also trying to avoid cutting right against the lines. And like said, this is going to be a downward outside curve over here. And that can be made with rough cuts or push cuts, or both. That's what I usually like to do. So at first it's nice to make bigger and faster cuts, and then closer to the shape that I actually want, push cuts give a nice bit of added control. The underside of the tail is going to be defined with stop cuts. I'm gonna make this slightly more downturned. That's good. Then I'm also making the edges of the front limbs a little bit rounder. And at least in my case, this part needs to go a little bit more inward. So that makes the front limbs thinner. I'm continuing these sweeping cuts all the way over here where the head begins, and that way I can make this underside of the neck where there's a little bit more fur that hangs down like this and creates this kind of a ridge. And then over here we need to make a few stop cuts, and this way we can slim down the legs also from the middle and create this clear separation between the underside of the neck and where the legs start. Very soon we're gonna separate the legs from each other, but before that it makes sense to create a little bit better of a basic shape for the antlers. And that's gonna start with this inside curve. I need to remove quite a bit of wood. And with this, I think it's good to use all kinds of variations of the sweeping cut. But you don't want to use a lot of force because you might accidentally rip a slice all the way from here back here. We want to avoid that, which means if the knife gets stuck, don't force it. Just change the cutting direction. Then we need to make an inside corner right here. And that means making this very small stop cut. That's good. Then I'm gonna make this top part of the antlers slanted. Next we're gonna give the ears their basic shape, and they're just gonna be something like this. So this means 2 V cuts, one below and one above the ears. And these V cuts don't just go straight like this, they curve a little bit so that we can get the shape of the ears more visible on the sides of the head. Before we separate the ears from each other, we're going to remove a little bit of wood from here. So we're going to make a similar kind of inside corner over here. And then by removing this bit of wood, we have more room for cutting over here. Since this is a little bit of an awkward place for making a stop cut, we need to make a V cut over here. Don't apply too much force because this is already very thin and it can break quite easily. So making small repetitive cuts is the best course of action. And then we can carefully try to remove this bump. The key thing here is just to take off very small and thin slices at a time. And now we can make this, I guess it's kind of like a pyramid cut or a 2-sided stop cut. So I'm cutting from 3 different sides, making this V shape at first and then taking off the chips by cutting along the neck like that. Now it's time to separate the legs from each other, and that's going to be done with these V cuts. And again, due to the frailty of the legs, we want to make small cuts, and it also helps us make cleaner cuts when the grain direction is not very advantageous, like in these kinds of end points. And again, this slicing motion, so sliding the blade like this, is key. Because if you just press it from here, a lot of the chips are just going to be left in between here, like that. But then, by making these slicing motions, you can get rid of them. At the same time, while making this V-cut over here, it's also a good time to make some iterations on the legs and try to get rid of any rough areas if you still have some. I'm also adding a little bit of curvature to the legs, like this. Here where the legs meet the rest of the body, I'm also creating this Y shape with some sweeping cuts, and that makes the shapes flow a lot nicer. So sweeping cuts over here and here connecting into this line between the legs, and together these form kind of like a Y shape. Then it's time for the hind limbs. And this is gonna work the exact same way. Small and careful cuts so that we don't break the legs. At the same time we modify the legs, it also makes sense to modify the tail, because we can connect the V-cuts that separate the legs from each other into V-cuts that separate the side of the tail from the rear, and create a similar kind of Y shape as we did over here, except now it's going to be made with sharper inside corners. This right here is the same kind of two-sided stop cut that we used over here. Next we're going to do the same thing for the antlers, and this works pretty much the same way as with the legs, except now we can make the V-cut a lot wider, something like this. But at first you need to make sure that the outsides of the antlers are decently symmetrical, so I'm gonna fix that first. That's pretty good. As you can see, right away when the gap becomes bigger, making these V-cuts is much easier, but you still gotta be careful, especially when you get down here, so that you don't break these by accident. Now it's good to make sure that the antlers and the head are pointing in the same direction. And then we can also make a V-cut over here. Then we can make the antlers rounder. Right now you can make some adjustments on the previous steps if necessary. So if something looks out of proportion, like for example in my case, this foot is still bigger than this one, so I'm gonna fix that. Maybe there are some rough parts somewhere that need to be made smoother. And then after that, we're gonna make a couple more simple details. It's a good idea to create a little bit of an inside curve on both sides of the head. Something like this already makes the head shape a lot nicer. Alright, then it's time for some of the final details. And those are gonna be just V-cuts. I'm gonna make something like this for the nostrils, then a mouth, and then V-cuts over here for the hooves. That's good. And then these ones. Just something like that on all of these legs. Just one more V-cut here around the eye, and he makes it pop up nicely. And once we've made these cuts, then that's it for the project.